Stargazing by T.S. Atlas, a Lulu and Veigar fanfiction. Veigar walked at a steady pace, feeling the cool night's air even beneath his robes. How ironic it was that he seemed to almost enjoy this peace, the tiny master of evil who wanted nothing more than to rule over Valorum with an iron fist, found solace. And even more ironic was that he found it in this solitary time. He would always dream of people screaming his name as he stood above them all. Now he wanted nothing more than just quiet. He had heard enough of his name lately. This was mainly due to the fact that the only person who actually did call out his name was Lulu, the Fey sorceress, and hearing it being called out in her bubbly tone annoyed him so.
Veigar!
Even now he could hear her. Lulu was much like any other Yordle, so shone with an air of happiness that surrounded her, but somehow, even more so that would be considered normal for a Yordle. The other hyper-Yordle girl was pretty crazy, and that was a lot coming from a Yordle with delusions of world domination. And most likely because she was a Yordle and is often seen as nothing more than a child, no one had ever really been honest with her. That is, except Veigar, who couldn't care less. He would, on a regular basis, insult the poor girl and not hold back, calling her annoying, which although was true, no one else had said it to her face. But she was elastic and just laughed it off. And the fact that she laughed it off as if not knowing what it meant was even more annoying to Veigar.
Veigar!
So annoying, he thought, that he would want nothing more than to blow her to smithereens. He actually threatened her before. He threatened to take her life, but she thought he was just playing a game, and it was a match on Summoner's Rift, and after a terrible loss, Veigar was even more sour than usual. Then in comes Lulu. Veigar, on a short fuse, decided to drop a dark matter on her with the intent of silencing her. Unfortunately for him, she shielded herself, laughing. She then proceeded to polymorph him into a squirrel, after which she kicked him, sent him flying, and proceeded to yell, "Go!" After that he just didn't even try. She was annoying, and for some reason she seemed drawn to him, where most people would be repelled by him. But that didn't matter now. He was alone, and now he could relax. It was just him and the stars high above his head.
Veig?
It was too late when he realised that his name was actually being called, and not just because he was thinking of Lulu. He had just enough time to turn, only to catch a glimpse of a certain oversized red hat ramming straight into his chest. Next thing he saw was the black sky and the many stars that peppered it. He gasped, having the air knocked out of him by the Yordle girl who now sat atop him.
Veigar, silly! What are you doing on the ground?
It took him a moment to catch his breath. When he did, he released it all in a hefty sigh. There goes his peace. He looked up at the girl with the yellow eyes glowing. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then he just shut his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose with his cold metallic gauntlets, very agitated. He was beginning to think that people didn't tell the girl what they thought of her, because she simply didn't know any better. He then thought they were all fools, and came to the simpler conclusion that her daftness was a symptom of her having no brain.
Veigar, are you okay? Wah!
Placing his hand on her shoulder, he shoved her to the side, throwing her off of him, although it was only a short fall. He climbed to his feet, pulling the collar of his robes up, and pulling the brim of his cap low to obscure his face, having nothing but his eyes shine from the blackness within the confines of his attire. It took Lulu no time at all to spring up, dust herself off, and place her thinking cap on more snugly on her head.
Veigar, what are you doing so far out here, away from the Institute?
Veigar didn't so much as look at her as he quietly continued walking forward. "Jeez," she followed after him. Catching up to his side, she linked arms with him, and after a little struggle, Veigar stopped resisting. They were walking up the hill, and yet Lulu, marching to the beat of her own drum, tried skipping, seemingly oblivious that she was essentially pulling a stumbling Veigar. But she stopped when they arrived at the top of the hill. The hill was higher than all of the other surrounding ones, and there wasn't a tree anywhere near it. They had a clear view of the night sky and the stars that twinkled lavishly. With her view cast upwards, Veigar took the time to turn his gaze to her. She was dressed as she always did, red and yellow, purple and black stripes. Her emerald eyes were wide in fascination, just like a child, soaking in everything before her. They sparkled more beautifully than the stars she gazed at, and it was just that he noticed she had something in her hand, a basket.
Veigar, did you come out here to stargaze? No, you half-wit. I am here to call upon the powers of the cosmos, so that I, Veigar, the master of evil, may become even more strong. It's a good thing I brought a picnic, then.
He looked at the girl. Was she intentionally acting as if she hadn't heard him? Or how she wished she was just playing dumb? But he hadn't thought much of her to begin with. He was truly befuddled.
What?
I brought a picnic, she said, holding up the basket, a wide grin across her face.
Now we can enjoy it while we gaze at the stars. Oh, Veigar, you are so romantic.
She giggled, giving a cute snort. She honestly couldn't be serious, could she? But before he knew it, she answered it for him, as she started to set up the blanket on the cool grass. Why him? He thought. Why had this annoying yordle taken such a liking to him? Why was she always with him, always following him, and always insisting that they be friends? Evil needed no companionship.
Veigar, what's wrong? Oh, did you want to play squirrel ball?
Veigar took his seat immediately, sitting on the grass rather than the bank itself out of spite. But Lulu didn't seem to mind much at all. She scooted a bit closer to him, placing the basket before them, although he hated to admit it. However, he was very hungry.
Sheriff Caitlin made these for us. Be sure to thank her when you see her.
Caitlin? Lulu pulled away from the basket a cupcake for each of them, handing Veigar his. Veigar looked at the treat in his metallic hand, then looking back at Lulu. He said nothing, but his yellow eyes showed his obvious question. Why? As if reading him, she started.
You know those little trap things that Caitlin puts down? Veigar scoffed. Yordle snap traps! How insulting that is to us! As if one of us were to be so idiotic as to fall for such a stupid...
Veigar slowly turned to Lulu, who at this point was facing away, her head held high as she unsuccessfully attempted to whistle nonchalantly. Thing, he finished.
Really? Well, what would you do if someone places a cupcake right in front of your face?
Her cheeks puffed out as she gave a huge pout. Veigar, deciding not to press the issue further, frankly he had heard enough, tried to relish the silence that Lulu had bestowed upon him. He never would have imagined Lulu being quiet. Then something hit him.
Wasn't Caitlin on your team? Shut up!
Veigar looked at the panting sorceress. There were tears building up behind her eyes, but she tried to hold it all in. Looking even more like a child than she already did, he sighed. What was this air of uneasiness? Should he do something? Perhaps this was why so many people held their tongue. Seeing her with tears in her eyes, even Veigar's black heart wanted to do something, although he would never admit this to himself. And yet, as the seconds ticked on, small whimpers started escaping from Lulu, who was slightly shaking. Veigar decided to take a bite out of his cupcake, an action that caught Lulu's attention. He didn't say thank you or anything, but that simple action was enough to cheer Lulu up. Maybe it was fine to tell her that she fell for the Yordle snap trap several times. But if it means that she can eat cupcakes with Veigar... Meanwhile, in Veigar's mind, he somehow convinced herself that he was merely eating one because he was hungry, and not all for Lulu's sake. She wiped away her tears, giggling slightly.
My cheeks hurt.
Veigar turned slightly away from her, but already the mood was lightening. It seemed that she had no trouble transitioning between emotions. He cast her a glance, and unfortunately for him, Lulu caught it and gave a big grin back to him.
I knew you cared. Humph!
Veigar jerked his head back dramatically in the other direction.
Like I would care for someone as annoying as you. In fact, I couldn't care less.
Again, she laughed at his insult. It seemed she was back to normal. She took to her own cupcake. Only rather than taking a bite, she opened wide and somehow stuffed the entirety of it into her small mouth. With stuffed cheeks, she turned to Veigar, smiling yet again.
What are you doing? Eating like Cho'Gath? It's unpleasant.
Lulu grinned, finding his reaction very funny. If her mouth wasn't full of cake, she would say something along the lines of, "Cupcakes are meant to be eaten in a fun way, since they are fun size." She hurriedly tried to swallow, so that she may point this out.
Disgusting! What a mess you've made!
Without really thinking, Veigar reached out to Lulu, his thumb caressing her lip. Although he wore a metal gauntlet, he did it so gingerly, scraping off the bit of frosting that remained behind after she gorged down her cupcake. She silently watched as he sucked her thumb, not wanting to waste what little remained of the aforementioned cake, which was admittedly good. She gulped, being left speechless. Veigar had to remember this. He could someday use this to his advantage. To be able to shut Lulu up was quite a skill indeed. However, why she became so silent, he thought nothing more of what he just did. But now he enjoyed the silence, turning his attention to the open sky above them. Lulu directed her sight downwards, fiddling with her fingers, blushing vibrantly. Veigar closed his eyes, feeling the cosmos in his very being. Lulu looked at him, curious and somewhat hoping that he was looking at her as well. She saw him, and for once the tiny master of evil seemed relaxed. He paid no attention to her, and for some reason she felt a heaviness in her chest. He would on so many times purposely ignore her, but right now she wanted him to notice her. Even if she did ignore her on purpose, though, he still knew that she was there. He would freak out, yelling at her, and she would laugh, just happy enough to spend what little time she can with him. But the way he looked seemed so far away. He wasn't trying to ignore her, but he was at ease. She bit her lip. She had to think of something, anything that would make him notice her. A plan came to mind, a plan that seemed diabolical, so Veigar-like. It was insane, and yet it was so perfect. But for it to work, she needed all the courage that she could muster. She reached into the basket, retrieving another of the cupcakes, and stood up suddenly.
Veigar!
She said in the most serious tone she could make. Veigar, slowly coming back to himself, looked at the yordle, and immediately snapped back to reality after realizing what was about to happen. Lulu wound up, and with all the strength in her little arm she possessed, she threw the cupcake at him as hard as she could. It hit him in the face. Although it didn't possess much strength, he was quickly knocked back by Lulu throwing herself atop him.
Veigar, look at the mess you made,
she giggled nervously. Her hands held his arms at his side. She gripped onto him tightly. Slowly, she leaned down to Veigar's face.
Lulu, what are you doing?
Veigar squirmed violently under Lulu. Now close to him, Lulu began removing the icing from the cupcake that somehow found its way onto his face. She closed her eyes, licking him like a cat. Upon feeling her tongue against his cheek, the squirming from Veigar intensified. He'd had enough.
Get off me! Eep!
Lulu wasn't strong, not at all, so it was easy for Veigar to push himself up. He threw her off of him, and now he was the one on top pushing her down. She looked into his yellow eyes. They looking much like an animal's, ready to kill their prey, and oh, how they glared. He was really mad. Really mad. And she was scared. Maybe she had gone too far. She clenched her eyes shut, her tears already making their escape.
I'm sorry, Vei.
He had finally done it. Veigar had finally silenced Lulu. Well, at the very least, he made it so she couldn't say another word. She still made some noise, but his lips prevented hers from uttering another syllable, and the noises she made were squeaks of surprise. He had finally noticed her, she thought. She just seemed to stop thinking, unable to prevent her from moaning softly, and then it was over. He separated from her, picking up his cap from beside them, it having fallen off when she tackled him. He pulled it down, once again, obscuring his face. Lulu just lay there, looking up at the stars, how beautiful they were, and oh how they sparkled. She sat up slowly, and once again she saw Veigar staring off into the night sky. Only this time he didn't seem so distant. He was right there with her, staring at the same sky. Veigar scooted over a bit, now sitting on the picnic blanket. He gave no protest as she scooted closer to him as well, and together they said nothing, as she leaned her head against his shoulder. This was a peaceful time.